If you know anything of its past, the name Dreamland Park probably inspires a sense of dread within you. A tale of kidnapping and murder is what this park is most well known for. But what if I told you that this park's shady past didn't begin with the murders that occurred on its grounds in August of 1969? To understand Dreamland Park's true legacy, we need to go back to the very beginning and examine the man who built it.
Who wants a pickle? That's disgusting.
Dreamland Park was the brainchild of Ralph Creitz. Creitz was born on July 27, 1899 in Reading. One of the first mentions of him in the Reading Times was a July 9, 1918 article about the then 18-year-old Creitz being a promising baseball player on a local club team. For whatever reason, it does not appear that his baseball career ever took off, and by 1922, Creitz established himself as a manager and partner in the newly formed VVV club team, which stood for Vim, Vigor, and Vitality. Creitz managed baseball, football, and basketball teams into the 20s and 30s. These teams were semi-pro in the sense that the players on the teams were paid, and it is with almost certainty we can deduce that these games were bet on, though gambling was illegal at the time. Speaking of gambling, Creitz became business partners with a man named John, known as Jack, Matz, in 1931. The two men partnered in a slot machine business they established at 1246 North 10th Street called Matz and Creitz. They quickly became the largest distributors of slot and pinball machines in the county. In 1938, when Berks County District Attorney John Reeser was determined to rid the county of all rackets, both Matz and Creitz were arrested for their business. Creitz was convicted on 6 charges of possession and distribution of slot machines. He only served 3 months of his 6 months to a year sentence. He requested an early parole, claiming his mother and brother needed his support. It wouldn't be Creitz' last tango with the law. In fact, it was only the beginning of a long and storied career of legal troubles. The first mention of Dreamland Park in the Reading Times was in reference to a basketball team Creitz started managing in the fall of 1938. Coincidentally, this is the same time the land that would become Dreamland Park off Pricetown Road in Ruscombe Manor Township was purchased by Ralph's brother Alton Creitz. The deed for the property, which was a farm and land at the time, was dated September 9, 1938. Owner Charles Cook sold the roughly 150 acres to Alton Creitz for $1. Realistically, this deal was likely under the table between Ralph and the seller, with Alton fronting legally for his brother. Construction began in spring of 1939, and the park was complete enough to hold a picnic for 5,000 people by August. Dreamland Park was open for business. In May of 1940, the beginning of the park's first full season, Alton Creitz petitioned a Berks County court for 10 policemen to help patrol the park. He was granted the petition, but Judge Paul N. Schaefer made him testify that no gambling would be permitted on the premises and no beer or liquor could be sold. It is to be an amusement park, and admission will be charged and free entertainment provided, insisted Alton Creitz. The judge asked him if he was connected with Matz and Creitz, and Alton assured him he was not. While Alton technically owned the land, it was established that Ralph had all of the buildings on the property erected at his own expense. Some of the structures included the clubhouse, 4 bungalow-style dwellings, a few one-room cottages, a 2,000-person capacity auditorium and dance hall, 3 concession stands, and a circular building containing a carousel. While the origins of the name Dreamland Park were never explicitly published, there was a popular Dreamland amusement park on Coney Island between 1904 and 1911 in New York City. It is conceivable that Creitz could have visited the park as a boy, perhaps foreshadowing the fate of our own Dreamland. The one on Coney Island allegedly never made any money, burnt to the ground, and then the land it sat on was fought over in a nasty legal battle. Creitz's Dreamland Park wasn't quite so short-lived. It hosted very popular events in the 15 years it was in operation. Boxing matches were hosted at the park regularly beginning in 1946. Advertisements ran weekly in the summer months for well-known musical acts like Cootie Williams, the Hoosier Hotshots, and Rosemary Clooney. It was, without a doubt, an entertainment and amusement venue for the public, but we can only surmise what went on behind closed doors. Dreamland Park, on the surface, appears to have been a way for Creitz to legitimize his illegitimate assets by making them tangible. In 1948, Ralph Creitz came under legal fire again for his slot machine business, this time by the federal government. A July 14, 1948 Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article reported that Creitz failed to pay enough income taxes for the year 1944 and 45. United States District Judge J. Cullen Gainey, who presided over the trial, found Creitz's case to be most peculiar and amazing. The judge said that the report he got from the probation department showed that Creitz's charity is unbounded. He has given large contributions to churches, boys' clubs, and other charities. Most incredibly, last Christmas, he distributed $7,000 worth of turkeys amongst the poor of Reading. The judge went on to describe Creitz as a relatively poor man who lives in a row house with his 70-year-old mother and apparently doesn't even gamble or use his own slot machines. Creitz's own attorney was quoted calling him stupid and a fool. He claimed Creitz did not intend to defraud the government, but that he kept no books. He didn't know how to keep books. The United States government launched an investigation into the mob that ran Reading's underworld in June of 1951. There was a book written about this era titled When the Rackets Reign by Ed Taggart. If this topic interests you, click the link in the description to find the book on Amazon. The investigation culminated in a Senate crime committee in which Ralph Creitz was one of the many witnesses called to shed light on the gambling and illegal activity situation in Reading. Creitz showed up to the hearing wearing a short-sleeved shirt and was shockingly honest in his replies to the senator's questions. He openly admitted to being engaged in slot machine business for 20 years. He also discussed various shutdowns he had experienced by law enforcement during that period, which he described as a nuisance to his business. Despite his lawyer's description 3 years earlier, Creitz seemed more brazen than stupid or foolish as he defended his business as legitimate, one that the people of Berks County wanted. He was adamant about paying $150 annually per machine in federal income tax. Creitz also admitted to having known local prohibition kingpin Max Hassel when they were both cash boys at Pomeroy's department store. I could go on with examples, but take my word, Creitz was up to his ears in Reading's racket scene. The Senate Crime Committee finished their report in August that year. The August 31st, 1951 Reading Eagle headline about their report described Reading as an open town in which the integrity of the police was politically strangled by rackets. While Creitz and others may have felt untouchable due to having Reading's law enforcement and government in their pockets, the feds were not on the same page. The hammer was about to drop, and Dreamland Park would be a casualty. In 1954, the IRS again came after Creitz for tax evasion. This time he was accused of paying only $8,000 of the approximately $86,000 he owed the United States governments for the years of 1947, 48, 49, and 50. Creitz pled guilty and was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. Court records showed that Creitz was the very first person to ever be brought to Philadelphia court twice on tax evasion charges. An auction took place on June 10, 1954 at Dreamland Park for some of Creitz's personal property to make up for some of the money he owed the IRS. The auction, which was allegedly $200,000 worth of merchandise, only netted around $20,000. Creitz served his 30-month sentence and was released in February of 1956. The February 6, 1956 Reading Eagle reported that Creitz was through with slots and planned to open a legitimate store across Pricetown Road from his Dreamland Park. The article also described his dismay when he returned to the park and found nearly all of his building's contents had been stripped and sold to pay his debts. Though that was the least of his problems. Almost immediately, the IRS was knocking on his door again. Now, the federal government was claiming Creitz owed them over $100,000 for the years 1942, 43, 44, and 45. Not only was Ralph a defendant, but brother Alton and his wife Catherine were also listed as co-defendants on this charge. The government maintained that while Alton and Catherine may have interests in Dreamland Park, Ralph was the real owner. They also claimed the park was worth $500,000 and that they intended to take it, too. The trial began on February 6, 1957. When Ralph took the stand, he claimed Dreamland Park never made a profit and that all of his money came from slot machines. He was adamant that he only owned the buildings and that about 100 men had helped erect them without salary. The article goes on to describe the property of consisting of 26 brick and stone buildings. Needless to say, no one was buying it. When Alton and wife Catherine could bear no more, they agreed to deed the property to the United States government in exchange for the end of the trial. With their decision, Creitz's Dreamland Park became a place of the past, but his troubles were not yet over. On March 13, 1957, the Reading Eagle reported that 63 slot machines were uncovered on a farm near Dauberville. Creitz admitted to them being his, but also claimed that they had not been in use since 1950. The IRS seized them since they were technically assets which could be used to pay off his back taxes. In a strange legal snafu, federal law prohibited interstate shipment of slot machines, so the IRS could not even transport them to another state where gambling was legal. After sitting on the slots without any way to gain monetary value from them for over 5 years, the IRS finally decided to dispose of the machines by throwing them all into the Atlantic. They literally loaded them onto a Coast Guard cutter in Cape May, rowed out beyond the 3-mile limit, and hurled them into the ocean. In 1962, the government tried one last time to get money out of Creitz, claiming he still owed over $200,000. Creitz's attorney countered that it was past the statute of limitations to collect on any taxes from any year before 1953. That was the end of Creitz's legal battles with the United States government. Ralph Creitz died of a heart attack on June 7, 1967 in Community General Hospital. His death certificate listed his residence as 1316 Hampton Boulevard. The June 8th obituary in the Reading Eagle recounted his tribulations with the IRS and described him as the owner and developer of Dreamland Park. Creitz's story was a fascinating one, which needed to be told in its entirety, but as we all know, Dreamland Park's story didn't end with him. The most infamous times were yet to come. On September 20th, 1957, the Reading Eagle reported that Dreamland Park went up for auction by the IRS. It was purchased for $34,000 by a local contractor named Paul Zip. The store structure directly across Pricetown Road was included in the sale. Zip used the property to store some of his construction equipment, but did not utilize most of the park's buildings. He again put it up for auction in 1963. The August 11th, 1963 Reading Eagle reported that the property was purchased for $50,000 by Musa J. Eways. Eways, who was president of Mast Engineering Company, was quoted in the article as not yet knowing what he would do with the Dreamland Park property. Besides renting out the bungalows and converted clubhouse building, it seems like most of the buildings continued to sit vacant and fall into disrepair. On August 12, 1969, 3 young men were driving out Pricetown Road when they pulled into Dreamland Park to ask for directions. When they tried to leave, a closed-panel truck was blocking the entrance. Several men appeared and forcefully took them from the car and into the auditorium building. Pagan gang members questioned and beat the three young men for 2.5 hours, thinking they were rival gang members. When 20-year-old Ronald Buchter stood up to explain that they were lost, one gang member stabbed him in the chest with a 5-inch blade. Eventually, they were allowed to return to their car, but threatened with more violence if they squealed to the police. Buchter ultimately needed surgery for his injury, and the hospital informed the authorities. Warrants were immediately obtained for 10 suspects, along with a search warrant for the Dreamland Park auditorium building. In the early morning hours of August 13th, 8 of the 10 suspects were arrested, most on site at Dreamland Park, where they admitted to have been renting the auditorium building for $50 a month from Musa Iwais. Iwais' son, James, was amongst those charged with assault and battery, robbery, conspiracy, and possession of narcotics charges. The August 16, 1969 Reading Eagle featured an article about nearby residents complaining about the Pagans at a township supervisors meeting the previous night. Ruscombe Manor Township Supervisor Raymond Everhart mentioned that several residents had notified him 27 days ago that the Pagans had moved in, and were apparently renovating the auditorium building and living in it without having permits. The board decided on sending owner Musa Iwais a snappy letter, citing codes and the township's displeasure with the permanent residence of a motorcycle gang at the property. Little did they know there were already 2 bodies in shallow graves nearby. Following the assault on the 3 young men, a few pagan motorcycle gang members decided to head to the Kutztown Fair. By the time the fair was ending, around 11:30 p.m., James Iwais, Harlan Bailey, and Leroy Stoltzfus Jr. returned to the park, where they met up with Robert Martinolich. The 4 decided to leave again to look for girls in the same rented panel truck. They made their way to Skyline Drive and parked at a lookout area to the north of the tower, next to a vehicle with a young couple inside. Bailey, Stoltzfus, and Martinolich got out of the vehicle Iwais was driving and got into the car with the young couple who were in the back seat. That couple was 20-year-old Glenn Eckert and 18-year-old Marilyn Scheckler. Martinolich was allegedly brandishing a handgun. The 3 commandeered the couple's car and followed Iwais back to Breezy Corner, where Pricetown Road and Route 73 intersect. The couple's vehicle, being driven by Bailey, pulled up beside, and a conversation ensued about where they should abandon it. Iwais suggested Leesport, where they left it near the railroad tracks, and everyone got back into the truck. When they arrived back at Dreamland Park, there were 2 cop cars at the entrance. They had come with the warrants to arrest the suspects from the stabbing incident. Because of the commotion, they kept on driving. It is during this time that all 4 gang members took turns raping Marilyn Scheckler in the back of the truck, stopping twice to switch drivers. After 2 more drive-bys revealed the cops were not leaving, Martinolich ordered Iwais to pull over just south of the park and let everyone off into the woods. At this point, Martinolich directed Iwais to go alone in the truck to see if he could figure out what was going on. Shortly after Iwais departed, 6 more police cars went flying up Pricetown Road to the park, and Martinolich instructed Bailey to take his address book and make a call to the Mother Club for help. Bailey left on foot. About a half-mile away, he found a phone that didn't work, as well as another about a half-mile beyond that. He began hitchhiking back when Iwais happened to pass him and pick him up. At this point, it was dawn. Iwais was running out of gas, so he drove the truck to a sit-go station on the 5th Street Highway, where he and Bailey were arrested. Police officers found the keys to Eckert's car along with the address book in Bailey's pockets. Both men testified under oath that both Glenn and Marilyn were alive the last time they had seen them. The events which transpired after Iwais and Bailey left Stoltzfus and Martinolich with the young couple are based on Bailey's testimony of what Stoltzfus and Martinolich revealed to him weeks after the fact. What we do know is that both men were arrested that morning in Pricetown, roughly a mile south from where the bodies would end up being found. Bailey later caught up with Martinolich and Stoltzfus in a yard at BERKS County Prison, where they were all awaiting trial for the August 12th stabbing incident. It is worth noting that during that trial, Buchter identified Martin Olich as the man who stabbed him the night of August 12th. Bailey testified that he approached the two and asked what had happened to the boy, Glenn Eckert. Martin Olich answered that he had asked the boy what his life was worth, and when the boy laughed at the question, he shot him in the head. Similarly, Stoltzfus admitted to Bailey that he had tried to strangle Marilyn to death, but when that didn't work, he hit her in the head with a rock. Both had been tied to trees and tortured before their deaths. It would be 2 months before police would find their bodies. Ewes and Bailey allegedly tipped off police to their location. Marilyn was found on October 23rd under a grave of rocks. Glenn was found the following day when an officer caught a reflection of sunlight off of the glasses still on his face. He had 2 bullet wounds in his skull. Both bodies were badly decomposed due to being exposed to the elements. As a result, physical evidence would be non-existent. District Attorney Bob Van Hoove charged Martin Olich with Glenn's death and Stoltzfus with Marilyn's. Ewes and Bailey's testimonies were key in both trials. They were really the only pieces of evidence against Martin Olich and Stoltzfus, who both claimed innocence. According to them, they were hiding under the floor in a crawl space of a building at Dreamland Park during the cops' raid that night. Later, that claim changed when Stoltzfus took the stand in his own trial and testified that he witnessed Bailey murder Marilyn by beating her with the butt of his gun. However, Ewes and Bailey's recounting of the events had always been consistent with each other's story. By the time they gave their testimony, they hadn't seen or spoken to each other since they were picked up at the Citgo station the morning of the murders. Convictions leading to life sentences in prison were imposed on Martin Olich and Stoltzfus within a year of the bodies being found. Over the years, they used their appeals but were never successful. They both died in prison, Stoltzfus in 2010 and Martin Olich in 2018. The Dreamland Park murders rocked Berks County. Decisions made by District Attorney Bob Van Hoove were wildly controversial at the time. He cut deals with both Ewes and Bailey for the sake of putting away Martin Olich and Stoltzfus, adamant that without their testimony, convictions would not have been possible. Many felt that the two should have also been charged for their admitted rape and kidnapping of the couple. It is worth noting that Ewes didn't see any jail time for his part in the murders. The few times he was arrested, he was bailed out by his father. This includes a stint where he fled to Texas, missing his arraignment. He turned himself into authorities and was escorted back to Berks County, where he was still allowed to go home. Bailey did sit in Berks County Prison for 2 years after the stabbing incident. He was ultimately set free because the Commonwealth never brought a case to trial. In a May 11, 1971 Reading Eagle article, Judge Hess described his 2-year confinement as a miscarriage of justice and expressed discontent at the fact that the prosecution never initiated a trial. After release, it seems like Bailey fell off the map. I can't seem to find any information tied to his name. If he is still alive, he would be roughly 88 years old. Ewes went on to be convicted in 1995 when he shot a 17-year-old boy in a car in front of his own home. After being acquitted of first and third-degree murders in that case, he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. For that, he served 5 years. In 2005, a book titled The Dreamland Park Murders was published by Doris Dort and Robert Snyder. Dort, a professor at Mansfield College, and Snyder, a decorated police detective, had a very different view of the events surrounding the evening of August 13, 1969. They alleged there was legitimacy in some of the dark rumors that circulated about the murder and trials, including payoffs, conspiracies, and links to other unsolved murders. They believed the wrong 2 men were convicted for the Dreamland Park murders. This book is almost impossible to find for sale. Right now, the only copy listed on Amazon is for $2,900, but I have heard that many local libraries have a copy for loan. On August 29, 1973, an article in the Reading Eagle reported that the 16-acre Dreamland Park parcel had been sold to partners David Garrett and Anthony Fischetti under Dreamland Recreation Company. The article also stated that their plans for the property called for picnic and banquet areas, tennis courts, and a swimming pool. A few weeks later, a Reading Eagle article described yet another Rusco Manor Township Supervisors meeting where residents showed up full force to oppose these plans to reopen Dreamland Park. Residents cited issues with zoning. The park had been granted an exception from residential zoning by supervisors quietly the previous month. Ultimately, the township rolled back their decision. The owners' appeals were rejected in court in February of 1975. Despite their development project never coming to fruition, they would own the property for the next half-century. The 5 dwellings on the property continued to be rented out as residences. Dreamland Recreation Company sold the property in 2021. Most recently in 2022, one of the bungalow dwellings was completely destroyed by a fire. Here's an interesting thing that was pointed out to me when I was given a tour of one of the bungalow buildings on the property. There is roughly 2.5 feet between the ceiling of the main story and the floor of the second story. What could possibly be in this space
Where the
between?
floor begins. So what is in this space between?
Given everything you've just learned, I'll let your imagination run wild. The 16 acres that include the immediate park area are currently for sale again. That's right, for only $885,000, Dreamland Park and all of its heinous history can be yours. 4 dwellings, including the original clubhouse, a bathroom building, 3 concession stands, and an old dance hall are still standing. The property, zoned R1, allows for development like single-family homes, campgrounds, horse farms, and other uses by special exception. For more info, I have added the listing agent's info in the description of this video. Dreamland Park's story is one riddled with nefarious activity. But what does the next chapter hold?